Welcome back, Dad, for podcast, what is this, 42?
Wow.
So we're really coming along.
Yes.
And today's topic is we are finishing the Sermon on the Plain, and Jesus is going to be addressing self-righteous hypocrites. So he's going to hit them very hard.
Yeah.
He's going to lay them out and call them evil, and his message is directed at those who say they love God but fail to practice his commands.
Yeah.
So it's going at people who say, yeah, I do these things, but they don't practice them.
Plain speech on a sermon on a plane, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to evaluate Jesus's words as Christians and ensure that we're not hypocrites, because it's very easy to fall into.
That's right.
And this impacts everything from social media to how we interact with family, whatever. It's just one of those passages that is so interesting that because people always abuse it, we're going to see judge not.
Yeah.
And a bunch of things, but it's all dealing with the self-righteous hypocrisy. Yeah. People who say one thing and do another. So I'm sure my enemies probably watching this are like, he's a hypocrite. Yours too.
That's right.
And then that's why Jesus is talking about honest assessment.
Exactly.
So this is podcast 42, Sermon on the Plain, Jesus' teachings on self-righteous hypocrites, which is taken from Luke 6:37 through 49.
It's good to be back with you. We are the pastoral team from the Colmar Manor Bible Church. The church had begun in 1936, as you know. We have our cornerstone out there, 37, and it went through various name changes. So in 1943, it became Grace Memorial Church. People asked me two questions as I became the pastor in 91. Who was Grace and when did she die? So I moved to have the name changed to Colmar Manor Bible Church.
I remember that.
1996.
I remember sitting in it was like a courthouse or courtroom or something with you. And there was we had to go there. And I remember my brothers were there.
Yeah.
I must have just been 6. And we had to go through the process of getting the name changed officially. It's just funny when I remember.
An attorney friend of your Uncle John's did this pro bono, but the thing that always makes me laugh is when he wrote down the president and organization, he didn't write Kenneth Joseph Burge Sr., but he put down Kenneth Joseph Burge Jr. And I always chuckle at that because I thought, God called you to ministry. Obviously, you're my successor. John Maxwell would say there's no success without a successor, but I do fix our initial coffee just in case he wants to get into the role a little sooner. But I really
don't want to.
Yeah, I really chuckle with that. But we're honored to be at the same church. It has had quite a history with being faithful to God's word, and we're seeing that carry on. You have a youth role, I have the senior role, but there's a lot of blending that goes on between both of us. But for us, it's a delight. We feel very privileged to be where we're at, and we thank the Lord for that.
And it's a church where you'll be instructed.
Yeah, yeah.
We're big into teaching and being accurate. And that goes with the music, too.
Yeah.
Leading the praise team, just trying to make sure everything is lined up in spirit and truth. So I would encourage people to join us on Sundays.
Yeah.
And you also have your online studies that you do, among other ministries. So I'd encourage people to take part in those. I always find it interesting that a lot of people, they church shop. It's what can my kid do this week here, there, the next week, where, our church is much more focused on let's learn the word of God than disciple.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's really not about, these giant programs, but it's more, let's just do the Lord's work of learning the truth and giving the gospel and then growing.
Absolutely.
So it's I would say non-political at church.
Absolutely.
It's a rare church. We don't do the whole politics thing.
Yeah.
We just do truth. So
Amen.
Join us on a Sunday morning. We'd love to have
you. Yeah.
So, all right. So as we get into this, I'll give a quick recap. Jesus went up on a mountain. He prayed all night. He then calls his apostles, his sent ones. He then comes down the mountain to a plain which is overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and he heals the sick. So it's not till podcast 41, or I guess technically 40, where Jesus actually calls his apostles.
Yeah.
So he had disciples for a long time. I think it's interesting. You think of guys like Matthias and others.
Yeah.
They were with Jesus basically this whole time. It honestly seems, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in Acts, those people who were considered for disciples had been with Jesus since the very beginning.
Correct, yeah.
So maybe he was a disciple of John the Baptist, who knows? Right. But so Jesus calls all of his disciples, picks 12 of them, comes down the mountain, and then he starts to preach the Sermon on the Plain.
Yes.
Different from the Sermon on the Mounts. I won't rehash that, so just listen to podcast 41 for my arguments for that. And then he starts his sermon with the Beatitudes, woes to those who don't seek the kingdom, and then loving your enemies. So that's where we pick up.
Yes.
And this account is much shorter. It doesn't seem that long, and it's really just hitting self-righteous hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
And in this context, he is speaking to his apostles and disciples and the crowds. So it's kind of a large group, but I would say he's more focused at his disciples here.
Yes, they seem to have front row.
And they would struggle with hypocrisy too.
Yeah.
So I don't think some people try to frame this that he's like looking at the self-righteous leaders and just condemning all of them, where I feel like this is more he's kind of telling his followers, don't fall into this.
Right.
And one note of caution, make sure you take verses 37 through 49 and understand they are a single concept, the concept of not being a hypocrite. A lot of people take one verse, judge not, and it will totally change how people, view their Christian walk. So context is key in this case.
Every time we do a podcast, you send me your notes, and I always love looking through them because you're always pointing out about the context and how important the context is. And that's so very true. I've written 12 books now, and my Revelation books, the one thing that I'm very happy about, if you go to soundchristian.com, there's an assessment of people that have written on end time events. And the gentleman who comments on my 2-volume set just goes on and on about picking up with the context. I think this is the best set of Revelation books because of the context. So this is important how you're framing this out today, because you're getting the whole block and not just doing what so many sadly do, taking one verse out of its context and just putting your thoughts into it. Yeah.
And the thing I look at too is I like looking at all 4 Gospels collectively. Each book has its own theme and they should be studied because there's a reason why they put them in themes.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I also like looking at the chronological order to figure out what's also going on in this time. I know a lot of Christian fiction, our series, they tend to really confuse timelines and create tensions that aren't there. And that confuses people because it's like, I don't understand why this is happening here. And then you open up your Bible and like, oh, it didn't happen here.
Right.
So context is so important. So here we go. And what I say with context is we have to remember these were all one letters.
Right.
Book of Matthew, it's basically a letter. The book of Luke, a letter. So it's just like we would write a letter or an email to someone, we wouldn't say, take one part of it. You say, take the whole thing together to understand it.
Sure.
And it's inspired, which is
adds to
it. So we start with verse 37. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. He's echoing the Sermon on the Mount here. He uses a lot of the same illustrations. Yeah. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Yeah. So this part of Jesus' sermon is on hypocrisy and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And this is when I look at myself and say, do I need to confess my sin?
Exactly.
Or maybe you listening today need to say, do you need to confess your sin? Because you judge and condemn others wrongly, which is very easy. And we have to remember at this time, Jesus was being judged wrongly. And people are saying he's a sinner, he has a demon, he's this, he's that, And he is warning that the standard his disciples used to judge their neighbors will also be applied to them. That's
an excellent point, the standard. I wrote down as a parallel text because I think this is a principle on sowing and reaping. Matthew 7:2, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. So these 3 commands, don't judge, don't condemn, and forgive, need to be applied, because if not, there's going to be a standard applied to us that we wouldn't really want applied to us.
And people take this out of context and say, oh, don't judge at all. And Jesus is making a judgment. So that's clearly not what he's saying if you have any brains. Yeah. But you're coming at a very bad perspective. You're saying don't judge at all because everything's a judgment we make.
Right.
But he is talking about hypocritical judgment. Mm-hmm. So the judge is someone who is elevated and they give a verdict. So we are careful not to be self-righteous and judge like that because God will judge us how we judge others.
If I can just interject quickly, from my deep theological upbringing, my favorite Martian, I was a product of the 60s, and whenever Ray Walston would kind of give this little thing on his head, you knew he was reading someone's mind. And I think that's when we sit in the judgment seat, what we're pretending to do. And there's only one. Man looks on the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. And that's the caution for all of us, because judging someone's motives is a dangerous business because often it's done wrong. So when you sit up in the position of judgment, you're really taking the role of God. And that's a dangerous place to be.
And we're going to see at the end of this, Jesus is going to be talking about works. Yeah. And not to see if the person's saved or unsaved, whatever, but to see if the person's a hypocrite or not. Yeah. And that is using judgment, but it's using wise. It's not hypocritical. It's not saying, that person does that, so therefore it's evaluating their very actions. And we know a lot of people who say they're spiritual, but they do very bad things. Yeah. Or we know people who try to act spiritual and they're always screaming at their kids or yelling and fussing and cursing. And then it's like, it reveals that you're a hypocrite. You're probably Christian, but you're a hypocrite.
That's right.
So we're going to see that. Paul writes in Galatians 6:1, brothers and sisters, if anyone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with the gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you won't be tempted. So we don't condemn our neighbor when we are doing the same thing. So if we're in the same sin, don't be going and saying, hey, neighbor, you need to get out of that.
Exactly.
While we ourselves are not doing it. So Jesus is going to give an illustration that he does not want his followers to wrongly judge or condemn. Instead, he wants them to forgive and be generous.
Yes.
So he says in verse 38, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. So he's saying instead of wrongly judging and condemning your neighbor, give to them. If you do, God will bless you. So I think he's really showing a comparison here. The people, it's very easy as a Christian to wrongfully judge.
That's right.
But instead, he's saying give, forgive. God will have compassion and he'll help you. Jesus is saying, don't be like the hypocrites who judge and condemn, but forgive and be generous.
That's right.
It's a good thing for us to remember that we should be a loving people, not always playing God and saying, hey, you're evil because of this.
God is a gracious God. He gives sunshine to the just and the unjust and the rain. And I think we need to follow his model of showing his nature to everyone, whether we like them or not.
And the point is they will ultimately be judged by Jesus.
That's right.
But he has all the information. So he also told them a parable. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit?
Yeah.
Those who follow religious hypocrites are like blind people who hire blind guides to lead them. They will both fall. Israel was following blind spiritual leaders, and they all fell together.
I think that's a profound point that you make right there, because that is what has been transpiring. And the two questions, can the blind guide the blind? The first one is preference with what we call a may, so it implies a no. No, you can't have a blind guide. It's not wise. And then the second question suggests a yes. Won't they both fall into the pit? And the answer is truly they will. Don't follow hypocrites.
So, and then I like this with verse 40, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like a teacher. So if your teacher is a hypocrite, you will become like your teacher. You will become a hypocrite. Yeah. So it's one of these things we see the tension, and I see that a lot. You see people with really bad theology, They get out there, they teach, and then you have schools of people with all that same bad theology.
Right.
Because they become just like their teacher. So here's a list of the hypocrite versus the genuine man. And we'll keep adding these together as we go through Jesus's words. The hypocrite, he wrongly judges, he wrongly condemns, he is spiritually blind. His disciples will become just like him. There's so many movements out there, even within those who are Christians, who just are hypocrites, or they can't see their bad doctrine and their followers are just like them.
Yeah, good point.
Then the genuine man, he forgives and he is generous.
I love what you do with verse 40 because you show the verse is truly applying to hypocrites in the sense the disciple is not above his teacher. Often that verse gets just separated and it goes, oh, we need to be like our teacher. And in the sense that is true, but he's pointing out the hypocrites here. But on the flip side of that, we need to be reminded we can only take people to the level of maturity that we are at. And that's important for us because the hypocrites, they have no level of maturity and yet they're leading people into the ditch. So we have to keep working diligently to be mature, to self-assess in order that people can truly follow us so we can say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Yeah.
So Jesus gives another illustration about not being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
This is a famous one. And this is what always ties in the judge not lest ye be judged.
Yes.
Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye? It could be translated dust, sawdust, little particle.
Yeah.
But don't notice the beam of wood in your own eye. Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take out the splinter that is in your eye, when you yourself don't see the beam of wood in your eye? Hypocrite. First take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take out the splinter in your brother's eye. Now, it's not a bad thing to take a splinter out of your brother's eye.
No.
Some people take this totally wrong and say, don't judge at all.
Yeah.
Where Jesus is saying, hey, if you judge, you'll be judged in the same way.
A little bit of humor here, too. You're imagining somebody with a roof rafter jutting out of their eye. And then, I mean, it's just this long board and then going, I see a little speck here. I mean, it had to kind of draw a picture in people's minds that would cause a chuckling.
Well, think of the religious leaders at this time. They're plotting to kill Jesus.
Sure.
But then they're going to synagogues and teaching loving your neighbor.
Exactly.
They're teaching the law of God as they're trying to kill God himself.
Right. Yeah, true.
So there's some irony, and they're probably in the crowd. But disciples and the apostles, they would struggle with this as well. That they would look at the little problem. You know, James and John, why are you trying to elevate yourself? As they're all trying to elevate themselves. You see so much just hypocrisy going on.
And that self-inspection is very important. I mean, when we conduct communion, we always walk them through the 1 Corinthians 11 passage. We remind the congregation that God had struck some dead and some were sick because they didn't have a self-inspection and make change that was appropriate to the Lord. So these words are profound because it just reminds us to always be looking at self before we deal with others.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So are you someone who is always finding issue and correcting others while not examining your own life and removing the sin from your own life? This is a problem. I see this especially with, we've talked about it before, but with YouTube and discernment ministries. Everyone wants to put in their 2 cents why someone else is wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you shut up and look at your own life?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, if you're within the church context, you really need to try to purify your church, do all you can to help people. Sure. But I feel like people step so out of bounds, and it's just everybody is critical of everyone. And there are times you need to say, hey, this leader, they have a bad theology. But it's not just to put down that leader. It's to let people know, hey, this information's bad. Sure. But let me show you what's true.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful with that because there's a lot of discernment ministries.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about it. It's a lot easier to make content that criticizes than actually create content.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How easy is it to watch someone and say, they're wrong here, and not really teach it all. So we have to be very careful with that. A hypocrite will gladly tell you about your issue, judge you, and condemn you while ignoring his own problem. So it's a guy going, hey, take this out of your eye.
Right.
And they don't see it. Clean your own house before you set out to clean others. That's point. Probably one of the largest issues in the modern church is everybody wants to try to help everybody else, where it's the old thing, you need to go home. Go home, In a literal sense, I wouldn't want someone to come to my house and say, wow, your house is filthy. And then you go to their house and their house is filthy. It's like, why are you telling me that? And I think people try to do that morally. You have people who are morally very unclean, trying to tell other people, you need to be clean. And there's just so much hypocrisy within Christendom. So Jesus condemns hypocritical judgment and wrongly condemning others. He will now explain how to discern if a person is a hypocrite with an evil heart or a person with a good heart.
I remember writing an article for preaching.com and talking about the need to evaluate yourself first. And that's what should happen in our lives as you and I are preparing these things. God is dealing with us constantly. I mean, the truth is, it's like, I need to work on. There's always things we need to work on, but it's the right thing to correct yourself first and then to go out and to do the ministry. And I don't think people really get that as much as they need to. There takes time to be in the Word, get the Word in you. It'll do its work of bringing self-conviction. Then you're ready to go to minister to others.
I think a lot of hypocrites are blind.
Yeah.
I think they do not see the plank in their eye.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that's why you need Christian friends who can come along and say, hey, look, something's wrong here. We were talking, we think a key word today is delusional.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians are delusional.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians think they're doing all this incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas, you're not even doing the basics.
Yeah.
You can look at families, you can look at people, and you can just tell by their fruit, you're a Christian, but you're a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And you confront them and they don't even get it.
Right.
So here we go with verse 43. A good tree doesn't produce bad fruit. Now, remember, this is talking about hypocrites. On the other hand, a bad tree doesn't produce good fruit. For each fruit tree is known by its own fruit. Figs aren't gathered from thorn bushes or grapes picked from a bramble bush. So a person with a good heart and right motives will be revealed by their good works and attitude, by how they love God and their neighbor. So you see they love God, they're obeying him, and they're loving their neighbor. Because at the end, we're going to see of this sermon, it's all about obeying his word. That's how you love God. You obey him. And you love your neighbors. However, a hypocritical person will be revealed by their works and attitude, by how they mistreat and nitpick their neighbors. So that's just so true to life. So this isn't saying this is how you evaluate if someone's saved or unsaved. This is saying, hey, this is how you can tell if someone's a hypocrite or not. Evaluate yourself.
Bad occurs 8 times, and it means, in the context of bad fruit, rotten, diseased, or putrid. It's bad fruit. I think when Jesus...
We've eaten bad fruit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it makes the point.
It does.
So a good person produces good out of the good stored up in his heart. And we're going to see that's built upon the foundation of Jesus' teaching. And an evil person produces evil out of the evil stored up in his heart, for his mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. So he says he loves God, but his actions go against it.
And just a brief comment on the word good. It carries the concept of benevolent, profitable, useful. So it's not somebody who says, I'm a good person. It's someone who's serving others by doing things that are profitable and useful.
Now we can look back in a moment at our list. But before we get there, Jesus is saying to listen to what people say. It reveals their hearts. If you are a wicked hypocrite or if you have a good heart. Christians don't listen enough.
That's true.
What do wise people always do? They don't talk a lot and they listen. Go to Bible study, go to youth group, go to whatever. Notice the people who talk a lot. They generally have the least to say. Notice the people who are quiet. I know that from even, my brothers, one being in history and the other in finance. They tend to know things, but they're not going to give you their opinion.
Right.
And you might say something, you can look at their face and say, they disagree with me. And then that's when you ask them. Well,
exactly.
But always watch out for the person who always is telling you what they think. The words that come out of a man will show what is in the heart of a man.
True.
Jesus himself was always being slandered and called evil. So in effect, he's saying, hey, you can look at my words and actions too.
Yeah.
And you can see if I'm genuine or a hypocrite. That's an application. So here's the list. Let's evaluate ourselves.
Yeah.
The hypocrite. He wrongly judges. He wrongly condemns. He is spiritually blind. His disciples will become just like him. He does not produce good fruit, and his mouth reveals that his heart is evil.
That's right.
The genuine man, the man who truly acts upon his faith, he forgives, he is generous, he produces good fruit, and his mouth reveals that his heart is not evil.
What a contrast.
So in verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things I say? A hypocrite calls Jesus Lord, but does not obey his teachings. And once again, we tend to always think Christian, non-Christian, but I believe many here are following Jesus.
Yeah.
And he's saying, you guys are hypocrites. Yeah. His disciples were hypocrites. They called him Lord, Lord, and then they would argue, they would fuss. Then we'll see many of his followers. You can just tell there's a lot of tension here.
Absolutely. Lord, Lord, how emphatic is that? But he's not interested, Jesus, in mere words, but obedience. And people talk, and we're going, I just want to see what you're going to do.
We know that with ministry.
Yeah.
There are doers and there are talkers.
Yeah, that's right.
Every church, every place has them. People say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And, I'll tell my wife, we'll see. We'll see. And, if people do stuff, good for them. If it's hard and genuine and, you're doing it for the Lord. But a lot of people are always telling you stuff because talk is cheap. It's easy.
It's true. Yeah.
It's easy to say, I'll do this, and then never do anything. So Jesus will give a final comparison between the hypocrite who hears Jesus' words and those who reject those words.
Yeah.
All right. So, and in the context of applying them in difficult situations.
Yes.
Because it seems like in this context, all these people are saying, Lord, Lord. All these people are saying, I listen to you.
Right.
But it's if they actually follow through. Verse 47, I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my word, and acts on them. So it's all those. They come to Jesus, they hear, and they act. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on a rock. When the flood came, the rivers crashed against that house, and it couldn't shake it because it was well built. So the Christian who listens to the words of Jesus, but not only listens, but takes those words and applies them, has a firm foundation.
And there's an emphasis on hard work. Both of our translations, the one I've used and the one you have here, dug deep, places those words side by side. But there's actually the you have the conjunction and between the two words. In other words, is showing how labor intensive it is. They dug and it was deep. And we know that because to have a good foundation, it takes a lot of work. Superficiality will ruin ministries if you don't have that solid foundation.
So the person listens and they stand. The storms come.
Yeah.
I think this is very cliche, but storms of life test the person.
Yeah.
And they don't crumble.
Yeah.
Their world's not shaken because it was built on the truth of Jesus' words, which they applied.
Yeah.
So this is the person who hears and obey.
Exactly.
So if you're a Christian, you're hearing and obey, be encouraged. But now in our context, I would like to say to the foolish man.
Yes.
The hypocrite who hears Jesus' words even says, Lord, Lord, but does not apply them. But the one who hears and does not act is like the man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The rivers crashed against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the destruction of that house was great. So trouble comes to this person's house, and it falls. How many families, just take an application, have fallen apart?
Yeah.
Because they all went to church, they talked about church, but it was all talk. And when troubles came, real struggles, the families just fall apart.
And we've seen a lot of that, sadly.
And once again, I think a lot of times people try to apply this to the unsaved, but I think a lot of this is talking about Jesus's followers.
No question.
That, their houses will fall. Doesn't mean they're going to hell.
Yeah.
It just means their earthly lives are shattered.
Mm.
So beware not to be a foolish hypocrite.
Yeah.
So here's our final listing of the hypocrite versus genuine man. It's worth looking at yourself as I read this list. The hypocrite, okay, he wrongly judges. He's obviously hypocritical. He wrongly condemns. He is spiritually blind. His disciples will become just like him. He does not produce good fruit. His mouth reveals that his heart is evil. He hears Jesus' words but does not apply them, and his foundation is weak.
Yeah.
Then you have the genuine man. He forgives. He is generous. He produces good fruit. His mouth reveals that his heart is not evil. He hears Jesus' words and applies them, and he has a strong foundation.
Yeah. Wow.
Anything you want to add before we get?
No, that's a great contrast. I'm glad you kept coming back to the list because it shows the difference with the two.
This will probably be a sermon we'll do sometime.
I'm sure
when you're not here, because I like it. It's a good one. Just the information is
absolutely
hard-hitting for a church.
It is.
So 2 employment points. Don't be a hypocrite or your house will crumble. Jesus warns his followers to reject being a hypocrite. Why? A hypocrite will be known by his words and works. So a question to ask yourself, am I a hypocrite who loves to judge and wrongly condemn people? I'm always amazed by the people who judge a lot, because those are always the people that crumble.
Yeah,
and it's just really fulfilling Jesus's words. Is my identity found in the hypocrite or in the genuine man? If I am the hypocrite, how can I change and be held accountable so I don't fall into the sin of hypocrisy?
And I want to chime in there. I can remember, this is 40 years ago, we suffered in our summer ministry. There was a couple that had attended our mother church, went out, was involved with the church plant that opened up their home for us to do a swim and study. So each summer for many years, we'd show up, we'd do a Bible study. And I was just new to it. And one of the young men who had been attending Bible college sat down next to me one day, and he has tears in his eyes. And it was all new to me. And he looked and he said, Kenny, he goes, I was Kenny before you were. He goes, Kenny, he goes, my dad's a hypocrite. Someone I'd known, someone had been active in church. But the good news was this individual evaluated what was going on. And this is Ezekiel 18 about assessing the sins of the fathers and to determine you're not going to imitate that to break those chains and the links that, keep generation to generation in sin. It was a beautiful thing because in his acknowledgement of that, he had determined that he would not be like that and made a difference in how he lived.
It was something I think you said Sunday during the opening with children that it was something, I'll kill your quote, but it was something like kids view their parents as heroes.
Yeah.
But it's not basically until a parent breaks that down do they change their mind.
That's true.
So it's basically kids always think their parents are heroes until they get to the stage that they start saying, hey, mom or dad, they're hypocrites. They're not honest. They're, they say one thing in church and they're another way at home. And that's what changed that whole hero attitude. And I think that's true. And I even see that with the young adults that kind of look at their parents and they're like, they have a lot of troubles. And you can just tell. And it's very discouraging. But we want to be at that point where we're not a hypocrite. And then we come to 2, obey Jesus's word and your house will stand.
Yeah.
So Jesus encourages his followers to hold on to his words and to obey them. Unlike the hypocrite, this person will not be shaken.
Yeah.
So the question is, am I genuine? Do I truly love God's will? Do I truly love God? And do I love my neighbor as myself? And then thought, do I ask God to search me and know my heart and motives? Am I ready to stand before Jesus and be judged? If so, that is a good sign that I am seeking and obeying the Lord. Any final thoughts before?
Stay in the Word of God. I mean, daily get into the Bible. We would encourage all, because that's when the Lord will lovingly and privately confront us. So much better to be confronted by the living God through the living word in the privacy of your own home, and then make those things right with God, and then go out and practice what you should, rather than God having to humble you publicly or deal with you in that setting. So it's always better just to have a deep, personal walk with God. Even as Jesus defines eternal life in John 17:3, he describes it as a relationship with the Father. I just pray that all of us take that serious and have a close walk with the Lord, allowing his word to correct us privately, daily. It'll make a big difference.
And also remember the context of the sermon. Jesus gave the blessing, but he also gave a lot of woes.
He sure did.
So as Christians, sometimes people will try to intimidate you by saying, you're judging, or don't judge me, where you're really doing what Jesus has taught in the past, which is you evaluate your own life, but then you help your brother.
Exactly.
And sometimes you have to say some very firm words to people, just as he did, out of love.
That's right.
And if they take it the wrong way, things happen. But that is podcast 42, Sermon on the Plain, Jesus' teaching on self-righteous hypocrites, which was taken from Luke 6:37 through 40. So take some time, I guess. We got a couple minutes. We're doing good. If you see me looking here, it's always check your time. I can start and just, we did a really interesting study on Sunday with the young adults. We've been looking at the concept of discretion. I feel like my teaching in the past has been very theology heavy with them. Yeah. So they're all at a good place kind of with theology. Obviously, there's more to learn, the study of God. Yeah. But we're at the place where it's like, okay, you know all these things, but do you actually use them? Are you using your discretion?
Yeah.
So we looked at 3. Usually I'm not a topic type of person. Usually I like to, but we looked at 3 questions. And I framed it by, do you think this is a good question? Do you think it's a bad question and don't respond to it? Or how would you reframe the question? And we looked at 3 hot topic issues that people are dealing with. The first one was social justice. What's your view on social justice? And then we looked at the green movement. Yeah. What do you do if someone says, how does a Christian feel about the green movement? Global warming, all that. And then third, what does a Christian say about our movies? Yeah. And it was really interesting just seeing the young adults try to answer those questions. Because just a quick recap with it, for the social justice, I said, anytime you put any word before justice, it's not justice. Justice is blind. And then we looked at the verses from the law that said, hey, don't, give a poor man preference over a rich man. And in the same way, don't give a rich man preference over the poor man.
Exactly.
And because they all have to deal with that at school with social justice. And then we looked at the green movement, and a lot of people, it was interesting, just a lot of them said, I want to engage with that. Well, I went more from the thing that God has set us as stewards. Don't be extreme, but see how you can use, recycling your trash to win a neighbor, to win someone, to become all things to all men, and not to be fake, but to say, hey, instead of closing out conversations of saying, you're some crazed liberal, to say, hey, there's some points we can really agree on, and then try to work the gospel into there. And then our movies, everyone agreed on. We don't, how many sermons have I listened to where they're quoting our movies?
I know,
and it's
I agree.
Are you kidding me? Or you're like, ugh. But the question I said is, what in your heart makes you desire to watch that content? Yeah. And that's the whole point of discretion. So
that's a good point.
I know that's kind of recapping one of my lessons, but it was
that's
a fun.
That sounds excellent.
It was really enjoyable to study and then see the young people just thinking. Yeah. So what have you been?
Yeah, I'm just thinking on your word social justice, because our ministry is such that we have more people who don't look like us that we reach out to than do. Yesterday afternoon, I meet with Pastor Michael Thompson. We ordained him. He's over in Bethesda Baptist Church in Northeast DC. And I'm just thinking, our message has been consistent. And I always chuckle with your middle brother, Daniel. He knows more than almost anybody we'd ever meet historically. But I always tell him there's only 2 significant people. It's Adam and it's Jesus. And we all come from Adam. And if we recognize that as all sinners, and the point being made is the reason we can have these dynamic relationships with African American and Indian and Filipino pastors is because that's how we view the scripture. We're all under the same umbrella of sin. We're all saved by grace, and we don't care who you are. We want to come and make disciples of all nations. So I appreciate what you're teaching them, because I think so often racism gets interjected into something, and it totally obliterates our ability to minister to others. And yeah, are there racists? Or yes, I was a racist before I got saved. We all are brought up in systems of hatred.
I told them that everyone has race issues at their base.
Yeah,
and you have to work through it, because everybody thinks they're superior.
That's right.
It's human nature.
It's
Maybe
human
not
nature.
even your race, but just you yourself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of something you have to work through with maturity, is that my people are not superior. I'm not superior.
Yeah. And we preach the same message wherever we go. I've been in Latin churches, Black churches, and I just always try to point out, because I'm trying to help them to reach people that are not like them in their communities. You just preach, we all come from one blood. You're a sinner, and you need the gospel of Jesus Christ to believe on it to be saved. And it's just what we do. So I appreciate your teaching to young people that they can think on those things and not get sidetracked in things that just divide instead of what brings unity.
And it just made me think of this with the whole concept of it's applying the teaching. It's not just hearing and saying, oh, that's good.
Exactly.
And that's a problem with young people in the church.
Yeah.
A lot. No, well, I won't say a lot, no, because I meet a lot of dumb Christians.
Yeah.
Honestly, you meet a lot that have gone to church their whole lives and say, have you never been taught?
Yeah.
Or every Sunday it's the gospel.
Yeah.
So they can give you gospel, but they have no common sense, no biblical knowledge. So,
right.
But we can leave it there.
Okay.
And we're going to be off a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. Pastor Ken and I are taking a little summer break. Mm-hmm. So you might not have content for a week or two, but then we'll be getting back
absolutely
mid-July. So just to give you that update. All right. We'll see you next time. Mm-hmm. Bye.